Hey guys, it's Jay, here with another review video. Before the review begins, I'd like to ask if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and share with others. Without further ado, on to the vid. The episode begins with blood tendrils hissing and launching themselves forward, though Lewis pays no mind to this and casually walks forward as well. Vale says to Lewis, "Light as ash, you walk through my attacks, avoiding them all, yet your blows are heavy. This fluctuation requires immense concentration. You're going to wear yourself out before doing anything meaningful. Your chi will vanish soon. You cannot do this forever." Lewis dashes forward and clashes blades with Vale, telling him he does not need forever in the process. He takes his lance and thrusts it at Vale, who dodges it. He then puts his sword behind his back, thrusting it into Lewis's head. But Lewis quickly forms a large ash fist and sends Vale skating back. He places his sword in the ground, and while holding the other one up, he says, "Very well, let us dance with him a bit, yall." A partial blood body springs up from the ground, making its way toward Lewis. The Lewis forms ash arms to stop its charge, but the force sends them both back. He then takes his ash sword and stabs it into Dothanil's head. While this occurs, Vale questions Lewis's choice to block, and asks if he's conserving his chi. He then asks if Lewis is on his last morsel of chi. Vale then runs on Dothanil, calling Lewis a disappointment. Lewis tells Vale to come as he prepares his lance and throws it, though it only grazes Vale's sword and crashes into the ground a ways away. He then forms a bow of ash and shoots an arrow, though Vale blocks this. Lewis then gets rid of the bow and clenches his fist and prepares to punch Vale, but Vale simply stops this with his foot, causing a shockwave, and following up with a slash right through Lewis. Lewis pays no mind to this and makes another attempt to punch Vale. Vale catches this punch while saying, "I can already feel your chi fading away, Ashen Lord. You haven't had nearly enough time to perfect this technique of yours. You're leaking chi through every gap. You will soon run out, and when you do, my blade will find your heart." The scene then quickly changes to that of rain, with Shay suddenly crashing down. Tevin is not far behind him and lands with the crash as well. Vale clenches Lewis's fist and then hits him with a devastating knee to his torso, which forces him to skid back, and Vale points out that Lewis can barely phase through his attacks, but Lewis says he's conserving his chi, as he only has a few hours left and he only uses it when necessary. He then laughs and asks Vale if he felt that, as for some reason he can sense someone's emotions quite clearly, adding that he thinks the one man Vale fears has just arrived. Tevin exclaims his frustration and says they should be right under their feet. He adds that Lewis should have regrouped with Yukiko and Azam not too long ago. He then asks what Shay is smelling, and as his eyes burn bright, he says it's the shadow. Tevin says Vale must be using the Anturium Dome, and that his chi and scent must still linger after he entered the dome, which is why he was detected and why Shay can still pick up a trace. He then calls out to Lewis and says if he can hear him, tell him where he is. Lewis, unaware of his brother's presence, continues to speak to Vale, saying, "I can only imagine what you feel right now. You're hiding your emotions. The sunfire you so desperately hide from is far too close for your comfort." Vale retorts that Lewis knows nothing of him, but Lewis only continues with, "The Anturium Dome should have banished us to another dimension, but somehow his chi still touches you. There is a very hungry wolf at your neck, Lord Vegizatha," as we see Shay is unknowingly standing next to his target, somehow singeing his clothes in the process. Now onto the highlights. So just like last week, there are two main things I want to talk about with a couple sub-points regarding them. First thing we're going to look at is the scenes regarding Anturium. Now, Tevin knows of the Anturium Dome, which means just like how Kaguya and Taidomeki's talents are known, as it is implied so by Gary in episode 49, Meki's talent at some point was also revealed to the wider public. Tevin then mentions how Vale's chi still lingers after he entered the dome. You may be wondering how this is possible, but I have an idea of why this may be. Due to how Anturium works, it cuts off all traces of things as it places them in a separate dimension, and this is why they can't detect Yukiko, Azam, or Lewis. However, I think the reason Vale's chi still lingers even though he himself is inside the dome is due to chi presence. To understand this, let's break it down from the ground up. Your talent is bound to your soul, and that is where chi flows from. And just like your talent, your chi can give cues as to your identity and intentions. Examples of this are the notes of hostile chi that we've had in the series from season 2 up until this point. Vale is an even better example of this and will help reinforce the term I'm trying to use. In season 2, the moment after Vale cuts Shay's Tomas that was pointed at Kaguya is when Bjorn is able to detect his chi, meaning his presence could be felt after his movements. And since Bjorn can smell his chi, we know Vale is not using chi shrouding. We also know chi flows from Kimyo's, which would also mean that unless you are using chi shrouding, you are always emitting some form of chi that can be detected. Bjorn also makes no comments on Kaguya's chi, which should mean the presence of Vale's chi is large enough to somewhat enshroud others, and Bjorn says he can smell Vale's chi next to Shay's. This should mean they have chi that is more prevalent than other chis Bjorn knows about, as Anton and Tevin are also present but aren't mentioned as well. Using all of this and circling back to my original point, the reason Vayal's chi still lingers even though he is inside the dome is because the presence of his chi is too large to hide. To simplify it further, imagine you walked into a mall and smelled something really good or really bad. The source of that smell is no longer there, but it is potent enough to leave a trace of where it once was. And this is directly why Tevin says Shay can pick up a trace of his chi through his use of chi scent, even though he knows Vayal is using Inturium. Moving on, this episode answers how the Inturium dome would appear to others. When Shay and Tevin arrive at the site, they are directly where Lewis and Vayal would be if they were in the real world. The area itself is identical to that of the one inside the dimension, which means when the Inturium dome is activated and closed, all those inside are put in an area in the dimension that is identical to that of the real world at that time. I say at that time because when Lewis and Vayal start their interaction and fight, it was not raining. However, in this episode and the one prior, we see it is raining in the real world, but in the Inturium dome, it is not. And this is obviously due to them being in separate dimensions where separate phenomena are occurring. This is why even though Lewis and Tevin are right next to each other, they can neither see nor hear each other. This leads me into the most important part of the episode, and that is when Vayal is burned by Shay's flames. The question we are all probably asking is, how is this possible? And the answer is simple: chi transcends dimensions. Now you're probably thinking, Jay, that sounds crazy, but stick with me. We already have an example of chi transcending a dimension, and that comes from Sabito's transference of the Hisame talent. Now I want to shout out Wolf Nara, as in his episode 136 review, he discusses the different planes in the Ordeal world and how chi and spirits travel through them. These realms would be their own dimensions or different planes of existence that things in the verse interact with in different ways. Since this conversation revolves around talents and chi, we'll use that as our example. When a Kimyo dies, their talent leaves the mortal plane and enters the ether, showing how it isn't restricted to the plane it is on at that point in time. However, in the case of talent transference, the talent does not move through the ether, but from one soul to another. These things are the reasons chi transcends dimensions, as given the proper situation, chi and talents can move to and from the ether. So when Sabito transferred Hisame to Yukiko, the talent itself left Sabito's soul and the Inturium dome, which is its own dimension, and made its way to Yukiko's soul. And this happened almost instantly. Shay is now the second example of chi transcending a dimension, and it is with the same talent as the first example, with that being Inturium. For this to be even more true, we would have to see at least 2 more examples of it in the story, potentially a talent directly coming from the ether to a Kimyo, or something else of the sort. But regardless, this concept should make the most sense considering where chi comes from, and who is allowing Kimyos to access it, with that of course being God, a being who transcends time, space, and understanding. Next, I want to talk about Lewis. Now, Lewis's performance was underwhelming in this episode. The last episode we see him in, which was 136, built up hype for his new capabilities, and Lewis in this episode failed to build upon that. In all honesty, I'm perfectly content with the episode ending in the same manner for him. It feels as though it could have been extended to include more scenes of Lewis matching Vayal's skills, as almost everything he does was foolish and puts him in a worse position than he was before. Let's now break down those decisions. His first major error, in my opinion, was getting rid of his ash sword. He stabs it into Dotanil, showing its capacity to aid in subduing the creature, but he never gets it back or decides to make another one. This is a mistake, as that specific sword is able to contend with Vayal's blades much better than his lance can, as he never shows recoil when he and Vayal clash with it, showing a somewhat relative attack potency with the blades. And it would more than likely have helped him later on in the episode, allowing him to not have to use his fists, which when he did, put Vayal in easy range to attack him. It should also be noted that Vayal only ever blocks Lewis's swords with his own, showing how potentially that blade could actually damage Vayal. His next error was throwing his lance. While his ash sword should be better than the lance, getting rid of your second weapon on purpose after leaving your first one is not smart, especially because his shot at Vayal wasn't effective. He would have been much better off keeping the lance and fighting in a manner similar to how he did in episode 135, where he uses his ash arms in conjunction with his lance to better contend with Vayal. This alone would allow him to rely less on his invulnerability, which is eating at his chi when he uses it. This would help prolong the use of Death Stance, as well as the goal he is trying to achieve, as he says he has a few hours left, but he could in theory have more if he was taking less direct attacks. Next is his use of the bow. The shot itself doesn't stop Vayal from getting any closer to him. Not to mention, Vayal reacted to an arrow shot in 134, so he should have already known this wouldn't have been effective in any capacity. To make it more effective, he should have shot more arrows, as this would force Vayal to block more. He could have also shot more than one arrow at a time, which would be good if he aimed at more than one spot, as it could make him block and dodge at the same time, slowing him down, or guarantee even if one arrow is blocked or dodged, another one would hit. The last thing Lewis does is be obvious with his punches. Both of the times Lewis goes to use a punch, he seems to wind it up, but that action alone makes it clear what he is trying to do, which is why Vale is able to stop both of them, and follow up with a counter as well. If Lewis is going to punch, it should be as a counter like he did with his Ash arm earlier in the episode. He does this in episode 135, and both hits were successful, especially the second hit as it drew blood from Vale, showing that Lewis has the sturdiness needed to cause Vale any kind of damage. And though his second punch was a counter to Vale's attack on him, it still takes him seemingly too long for him to actually attempt the punch, giving Vale time to read it and catch it. One thing that Lewis isn't doing at all is using his Ash creations. I'm assuming he's not as a means of conserving chi, however he almost implies his chi depletes faster when phasing through attacks. And if that's the case, at least one good Ash creation wouldn't seem like it would affect him too badly. I bring the creations up due to how actually useful they were before. As I mentioned in my 134 review, the creations were used as a means of distracting Vale to help Lewis land a hit and avoid one. Vale also mentions the sturdiness of Lewis's Ash after kicking the gorilla away, and that same gorilla was able to hit Vale away in the following episode. This gorilla is probably the best creation Lewis could use in his fight right now, as two opponents is better than one, and it could help cover Lewis's lack of defense by blocking attacks from Vale, leading to him not having to phase through attacks, which would conserve more of his chi. Moving away from my critique of Lewis's fighting style, let's now look at something he says. In reference to Shay, he says he can sense his emotions quite clearly. While there is no direct reason as to why he can do this, there may be one we can come up with. In episode 132, Vale says Azam is bound to Shay's soul, and in my review of that episode, I disregarded the literal meaning of this in favor of the metaphorical meaning, which related to Azam's talent, kidding. I still believe that interpretation is very true, but I now also believe the literal one is as well, and I see this connection as the reason Lewis can sense Shay's emotions. Now, someone in the Discord wondered if Tevin would have a similar connection to Shay as well, based on how they are portrayed with one another, and Brent's response to this is soul ties, adding that it is a real thing and that the wolf pack is tied. Now, the concept of soul ties is often understood as a deep emotional or spiritual connection between individuals, particularly formed through close relationships or significant experiences. Considering how the wolf pack have been raised together since they were children, this concept should apply to them. Looking even further at this concept using an example from the Bible, in 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 1, it reads, "The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved David as his own soul." Now, the relationship between Jonathan and David is quite deep and more long-winded than I can get into. However, the concept of them loving one another as their own soul is very important, and suggests the relationship goes beyond that of normal friendship and is rooted in a deeper spiritual connection. And this applies to the Wolfpack members, as they do not just simply love each other as if they were brothers, but also as if the other's being was their very own. And again, this is why Lewis is willing to die protecting Azam, and why Anton shows up ready to fight at Shay's side, even if it means going 100% leading to his death. So they, in an essence, are ready to protect what they subconsciously see as a part of themselves. This deeper spiritual connection could lead to something beyond normal understanding, and it's why Lewis can sense Shay's emotions even though they are dimensionally separated. This also adds to why even Lewis is unsure of how he can do this. To end things off, I want to say this is probably my least favorite episode out of the season so far, and it is directly due to Lewis's showcase in this episode. As I said in the highlights section, he fails to build upon the hype episode 136 gives us, as he pretty much performs worse in this episode than he did the previous ones we see him fight in. I truly would have liked to see more positive showings from him, even if the episode's fight outcome is still the same. It would just go to show that this form is as strong and as good as we think it is, and depending on how it would be done, would show how skilled of a combatant Lewis actually is, even with his lack of experience with the form. On a positive note, I really enjoyed the panels and the characters when they were next to each other but separated by dimensions, as it's a very visually cool concept that I'm not sure if I've seen in other media, especially the way it's drawn in Brent's art style. And lastly, for the comment of the week, I would like to put a spotlight on Trag Summer, who comments on Tevin calling out to Lewis not knowing how close they really are is heartbreaking, as well as how exciting it is to see how unhinged Shay really is, as his thin veil of calm is starting to break. He also finds it interesting that Shay Shay is able to interact with the Enturium Dome and thinks it's possibly due to Shay's body. Now, I agree with everything he says, except for the last point, not because I don't think it's possible, as my explanation of transcending chi should confirm something like this can happen, but because it is the chi of Ilios interacting with things inside the dome. And how it has been explained so far, the only thing Shay's body does for Ilios is allow him more overall use of it, and the gateway to the ether his body is, with said chi from it resting faintly on other Kimios, wouldn't allow the Ilios talent to do so as well, meaning it shouldn't be able to interact with the Enturium Dome for that specific reason. But anyway, that's the video, guys. Let me know what your favorite part of the chapter was in the comments below, as well as how you feel about the things I mentioned in the highlight section. Don't forget to read the actual episode for yourself, and be sure to like it as well, and I will see y'all in the next one.